Hello and a very warm welcome to another edition of Talking Germany, the show where we do just that. And my guest today is a journalist and author who's made it her business to explore both sides of the social divide here in Germany. And here she is, Julia Friedrichs.
Hello.
Thank you very much for joining us today, Julia, here on Talking Germany. Great to have you here. Now, for a long time, Germany was widely viewed as, in many ways, a very egalitarian society. But now, the haves and have-nots are drifting further and further apart. Julia Friedrichs has written 2 books on this emotive subject, as well as another called Ideals, the quest for what matters most. And I'm sure we can very much look forward to talking to her about the following topics. Rallying call. Julia Friedrichs complains that her generation is too pragmatic, is doing too little to change the world, and she calls for more commitment. Paying the price. Many experts argue that societies based on deep inequalities are fundamentally unhealthy. If they're right, what does it mean for Germany? And good idea in principle. Germany is introducing a new system of college scholarships paid for by state and industry. But there are questions about whether it'll work. Julia, thank you for joining us once again. Now, many people, I think, if they'd looked at your career and how it's developed in the last decade or so, would possibly come to the conclusion that you are obsessed with the whole issue of social justice and social equality. Is that the case? And if so, why?
Well, calling it an obsession is a slight exaggeration, but it is a topic that interests me. At some point, we stopped talking about the issue of poverty here in Germany. In 2006, when the term lower class was used for the first time, people got upset about it. They said, "Oh God, is there a lower class in Germany?" And at that time, 2 colleagues and I were paying visits to families. We met people who were poor, who said, "Yes, of course we're the lower class. Of course we're struggling. We have no way of improving our situation. Nice that you're finally noticing us." So I do think it's a very important topic, and a lot has happened in Germany in recent years. But sadly, what's happened is that the gap is widening. So journalists should take an interest in the topic.
It's a little bit paradoxical, nevertheless, because here in Berlin, the city that we're actually in, if you walk around the streets of Berlin, and you have to say that this is certainly, not Germany's most wealthy city, there are very few signs of poverty, of the kind of poverty that you're talking about.
Well, of course, we do see people fishing bottles out of trash bins and recycling containers, and sometimes we do see people begging. But one of the defining things about Germany, and one of the things I really appreciate, is that we can all still move about the city at any time of the day and not have to worry. There aren't any no-go areas here, places where people are afraid they'll be mugged or something like that. I live in Kreuzberg, which is considered by some a rough area, at Hermannplatz. But nothing has ever happened to me. I can walk around even at night, and I feel safe. That's a very good sign. Nevertheless, there is poverty in Germany. The poor families I met with tend to withdraw, to retreat into their apartments. This form of isolation is a sign of poverty. They stop taking part in public life. I spent 3 weeks with a family, and we were inside their tiny apartment almost the whole time. I could see how they argue with each other, how they tried to cope with the situation in that small space. The biggest problem is that they never go out. So even if we don't actually see poverty, it doesn't mean that it isn't there.
Well, that's interesting, Julia. We learned from that report that you have a list of ideas, of ways of sort of changing the world. Yeah, very ambitious. What's on the list at the moment?
Oh, it's not that ambitious. A couple of things on my list at the moment are to participate in more demonstrations. I also want to take part in a grassroots wind energy initiative. I want to find out how much people earn in the shops I go to. And this year I'm going to take a closer look at organic food stores. We tend to believe they belong to an ideal world, but the employees are often poorly paid.
OK. It's interesting that in the title of this book, that your latest book, the title of the book, let's just remind our viewers, Ideals, the Quest for What Matters Most. You use the word ideals, but I have the sense that you are a little bit suspicious of idealists. Is there a difference between ideals and idealists?
Also das Wort Ideale, glaube ich, ist erstmal.
There's nothing suspicious about the word ideals. I believe that we need ideals. John le Carré, the spy novel author, said something along the lines of, ideals are like the stars that shine over us. We know we can't reach them, but it would be sad if they weren't there. There's no reason to object to idealists, but the people I did become rather sceptical about as a result of my research were those I described as ideologues. It doesn't take much to go from being an idealist to being an ideologue. I met people, like one young activist in particular, who do everything they can to better the world, but who also have a very hard time accepting that other people might live differently and make different choices. That's when I think they've gone too far, when they can't accept democratic majority decisions, when they say they can't accept those decisions because they're wrong. In that sense, I have nothing against idealists, but I do have a real problem with ideologues.
Keine Vorbehalte gegen Ideologen, aber schon sehr.
Okie dokie. Do you have a problem with your generation? It sometimes seems as though you do.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Ja, habe ich. Ich glaube,
yes, I do. I think a lot of younger people, and I would include myself in that, have had misguided priorities these past years. We've been under a lot of economic pressure, different from what, say, my parents experienced. They were sure they'd find a job after graduating university. But that's changed. We worked hard on establishing careers, on succeeding. We invested a great deal of energy into it, which is understandable. We all want to work for and find our place in the world. But it's a mistake to forget that we can also help shape that world. We can influence the way it looks.
When we're talking about shaping the world and when we're talking about changing the world, surely politics is the right place to do that. Why haven't you gone into politics?
Because it's not my job. My job is being a journalist.
But is politics a place where you can change the world?
Ich glaube, ja.
I think so, yes. And I'm grateful that there are still people who do go into politics. I think it would be great if more young people would go into politics. But unfortunately, not many of them do. I think it's part of the job description as a politician. It's your job to shape the world.
Now, Germany is, in international comparison, a relatively well-off society. In fact, a very well-off society, let's be honest, and a society where, again, in comparative terms, wealth used to be relatively fairly distributed. But that has begun to change with, so the figures show, the rich getting rich and the poor getting poorer.
Most Germans are doing well despite the financial crisis, but not all of them. Germany is an affluent country, but some people are slipping through the cracks. Inequality is on the rise, and many people worry they're losing their safety net. Researchers in Germany are looking into what these changes mean. Media sociologist Johannes Siegrist studies the impact of the labor market on health. One study of 15 European countries has shown that people in countries with strong social welfare and labor policies are healthier than in states that take a laissez-faire approach.
We know that people need a certain level of security and stability at work and in their social relationships. When this security and stability is threatened, for example, when job security declines for people who have families, who've bought homes, when fundamental security is threatened, then people get sick. And people's social relationships also suffer. We see more competition, envy, even violence.
In recent years, Germany has weakened its protections for workers and made cuts in social and welfare services. Sociologists at the Technical University of Darmstadt have studied the effects of these changes. They've looked at statistics provided by the German Institute for Economic Research, the EU, and the OECD.
A lot has changed here in the past 10 years. The income gap between rich and poor has widened more than in any other Western European country. In a relatively short period of time, Germany has moved towards countries like Britain and the US.
Life has become tougher for children as well. Social mobility has declined. It's even harder for children from underprivileged families to climb the social ladder.
An increasing number of children are falling through the cracks. About 15% drop out of school. We haven't seen numbers like these in Germany before, this many kids who are struggling. In the US, they've been dealing with that for a while.
Germany still has a better safety net than the US. But the social and economic repercussions will take years to show their full effect.
Julia, I'm very curious. We've listened to, in that report, we've heard about people who are at the top of German society, we've heard about people who are at the bottom of German society, and you've been out there and you've written books about both sides of this divide, yeah? Where did you feel most comfortable yourself? Because obviously you're a middle-class person, you're articulate, you're educated. Did that make it difficult for you to rub shoulders with people who are suffering from poverty?
I wouldn't say it was comfortable on either side. At both ends, I felt like I didn't belong. With the elite, I felt that was obvious to everyone, based on my clothes, my behaviour. I often felt insecure, and their conversations about where they went on holiday, to an island or St. Moritz, they fit all of these clichés. I simply didn't belong. It was striking the way young people talked about wanting to be part of the elite, the way they talked about poor people. They'd say people without jobs are just stupid and lazy. That's why they're not getting ahead. They'd say, we'll make it because we're great and we're so hardworking. That's a bit simplified, but often that's exactly how it sounded. Horrible. During my research, I sometimes went into the restroom just to take a break from it all. And when you're doing research with underprivileged families, it's hard to be clear about your own role. To say, I'm a journalist, I'm reporting about you, I can help give you a voice, but I can't change your lives. I'll be leaving your family. I can't look after your children. I can make a phone call or two, but I'm not a social worker, and that can be tough. Spending time with a family that's very poor, where you see the children aren't doing well.
In einer Familie ist, in der große Armut herrscht, wo man auch merkt, den Kindern geht's nicht
gut. You close the door, step back into your own life, buy a latte macchiato for €3, knowing that's what they have to live on for a day. That feels terrible. But that's the reality of it.
OK, Julia, you have identified the problem. There's a growing divide between the haves and the have-nots. We've spoken about that already. Who's to blame?
It's rarely the poor, although they're often turned into scapegoats. We've seen that in Germany, where people just say the poor are lazy. But that's not what I've seen. Of course, some people don't seem to want to work, but realistic estimates say that's maybe 5 or 10%, a trivial number. Most of the people I met want to work, and they want to give their children a good life. That's a basic need. Almost everyone wants their children to have a good life. The responsibility is a political one. Politicians passed the laws that accelerated this trend. In recent years, we deregulated the labour market. We deregulated the finance industry in the late 90s. Many things were liberalised, and we lost sight of the other side, that we still need to ensure that people have security. What the trade unions are asking for, that we go back to the days when people held a job for 40 years, well, that's just silly. We'll never have that again. But we do need to be able to provide people with security, to offer social protection and opportunities. I think policymakers have really missed the boat on that.
Und ich glaube, das hat die Politik total verpasst.
And a quick question. We've mentioned the word elite already. Surely any society needs an elite, people who are encouraged and promoted, talented people who are nurtured to lead the way.
Ja. Also, da ist nichts gegen einzuwenden.
Sure, that's undeniable. I'm a huge soccer fan, and of course, I don't want my favourite team to have a bad goalie. But in a democracy, when it comes to elites, talent and ability should be what matter. And that's not the way it is. All the research we've seen on Germany says that social background is the primary factor in advancement, much more important than ability and performance. And that's not a viable elite in a democracy.
OK. Well, education is always an important aspect in any discussion about how best to organise society. It too, of course, has to be paid for. And for about a year now, there's been a new scholarship system in place here in Germany. The idea is that state and industry share the burden of giving gifted students that little bit of extra cash that can really make the difference. But the scheme isn't going entirely according to plan.
2.2 million Germans attend university each year. 23% finance their studies with help from BAföG, the state programme offering grants and loans to students from low-income families. For the past year, students have also been able to apply for the new Germany grants, which provide funding to high-achieving students. The grants give students €300 a month, half donated by the state and half by sponsors, mainly from private industry. Germany's education minister says it's an idea whose time has come.
Developing a new culture of grants in Germany means acknowledging and rewarding students with outstanding abilities and creating a new culture that taps into alumni support as well.
However, student associations have staged protests because performance-related bonuses in the existing BAföG system will be scrapped. But the state still plans to expand the new grant system to 160,000 students a year.
It's an ambitious goal, and we'll have to exert ourselves to find enough private sponsors for the program, but we'll give it a try.
There were supposed to be 10,000 Germany grants last year, but less than half were awarded. Universities can't find enough private sponsors to pitch in, so €7 million of state funds went unused.
I need you to help me a little bit here, Julia. I'm not sure that I understood the report correctly. Now, industry here in Germany, they're always the spokesmen, the spokeswomen of industry, they're always wringing their hands and saying there aren't enough qualified and skilled people being turned out by the universities and colleges. But here they have an opportunity to make a contribution and they're not doing so. Am I understanding this right?
Yes, that's right. It shows that a lot of it was just paying lip service. Businesses and industry want to hold the state responsible and tell the state, you have to do more. You have to make it all more competitive, more Anglo-Saxon. And when the state says, yes, but you need to do your share as well, then industry isn't quite as enthusiastic. I've even seen it at private business schools, who work very closely with industry and corporations. Even they say they've got huge problems getting donations. So industry isn't putting their money where their mouth is.
Okay, let's just talk about it a little bit, because this is something that you know a lot more about than I do. How is university education in Germany traditionally funded? When you were a student, what happened? Where did you get your money from?
I got my money from my parents, and I earn money by working. That's often how it's done. And if parents don't earn enough, in Germany we still have what's called BAföG. The state gives students money to live on, and later, when they get a job, they have to pay back half of it. It's a system that's very clearly designed to help people who can't pay their own way through university. That's how my father got his degree. The problem is that it's been years since the BAföG amount went up. It's getting harder and harder to get by on that amount. So I do think it's a problem when the state creates a program that benefits everyone, whether they need it or not. And the best get extra money, even if their parents have enough money, even if they don't need those extra €300. But with the people who really need the help, then we're stingy.
And you've used the dreaded word Anglo-Saxon. You've suggested that Germany, the education system in general, is becoming more Anglo-Saxon. Is that the case? Is it really now in Germany the situation that it's only really the kids from the better off families who get the best education?
We're not there yet, but it's heading in that direction. In Germany, the state system is still the mainstay. But it's starting to fray around the edges. Private education is growing, especially in cities like Berlin. Even for young children. In the past few years, we've seen a lot of new private elementary schools. This is new, because we mainly had state-run schools in the past. But now many parents are saying that's not enough. We want something better for our children. And of course, that ends up increasing inequality. It's the same with universities. We're starting to see more private programs where you have to pay. So the hurdle for people who don't have money is even higher. It's harder to get in.
Mm-hmm. You've got one child. Your child is a son, 2 years old, yeah? I'm in the situation that I've got two children who are teenagers now, yeah? And it's interesting because you have been complaining a little bit about your generation, about them not being committed enough. But could it be the case today that children simply at school, because it's all become so much more competitive, simply have to work so much harder that they have less time to be, as you would say, committed?
Ja, auf jeden Fall. Also ich glaube, wenn man
yes, definitely. When I say it's something I'm concerned about, that doesn't mean I blame them.
You regret it.
I regret it. And I blame the people who are putting school children and students into the situation. There's no law that says we have to keep increasing the pressure on children, to keep asking more of them until they can't do anything apart from school, until university students have time for nothing other than their studies and getting ahead, and no time for wider interests. Getting through school or university these days isn't easy, and then the students still have to deal with all those internships and with finding a job.
OK. Well, thank you for that, Julia. Now, if you've enjoyed the show today and you want to find out a little bit more about my meeting with Julia Friedrichs, then all you have to do is to read my blog on the Talking Germany website, and do please post your comments.
If you're into Talking Germany, you can find out more on the internet. Your host, Peter Craven, is keeping a blog on the many shows and guests in the series. Find out more about what happens behind the scenes, gossip, experiences, how the whole show is put together. Just visit blog.dw-world.de/talkinggermany. And you can tell us what you think about the programme there, too.
OK, Julia, time for our traditional quick quiz at the end of the show. Quick questions, quick answers, please. Yeah, one of the most important things that we've talked about without doing it explicitly is the following question. Are people naturally selfish or naturally altruistic?
I
believe people are altruistic, not selfish. We're herd animals.
Also eher ein Herdentier.
Okie dokie. Are you personally a winner or a loser?
A winner.
Who's happier, the rich or the poor?
The rich.
Is your son going to grow up in a fairer or a meaner Germany?
I hope he grows up in a fairer one, but the reality is probably not.
Nein.
I hope you're wrong. That's all we've got time for today on Talking Germany. Today's guest has been the idealist, the questing idealist, Julia Friedrichs. If you've enjoyed her company as much as I have, then do come back next week. Until then, bye-bye and tschüss.